Lady, you got it. Step up there for a minute.
Well, as it's 10 o'clock, I guess we'll start. Thank you for attending today's press conference. My name is Jane Cormier, Representative Jane Cormier, from Belknap District 8, the towns of Alton, Barnstead, and Gilmanton. And we are here today to discuss some serious concerns with regard to the New Hampshire Department of Education and possible overreach with its implementation of Common Core and the Smarter Balance assessments. Parents and taxpayers are waking up to the issue of surrendering our state education authority to a centralized federal authority with its rush to implement Common Core in New Hampshire. They have serious questions regarding untested educational standards, questions of funding, and overreach of authority within the New Hampshire DOE. But rather than honestly responding to these questions, the New Hampshire DOE has instead chosen to deny, distort, or even demonize those asking these very questions. Does our DOE answer to no one? Do they have the power in statute to make up authority for any division it deems necessary? Let's be very clear here. This is not a search and destroy mission. The New Hampshire DOE is committed to a nationalized standard and by thus a nationalized curriculum, which is prohibited by no less than 3 federal statutes. It is not a political means to an end, as some would say. Rather, this discussion is the checks and balances of our government, which demand the citizenry be informed and engaged within such discussions. The DOE should advocate nothing less. Here are some of the questions specifically we have to ask the New Hampshire DOE. Number 1, where were the taxpayers and parents brought into this discussion of Common Core implementation before the New Hampshire DOE pushed it through in July of 2010? Parents in Alton were not asked what they thought prior to the implementation, and it's clear from the many, many emails and calls that I have received from all over our state that many citizens agree with this assessment. How did Common Core get into our districts without the knowledge and consent of the people or their representatives? Were there forums? Were there hearings? Were they only addressed in closed-door meetings? If so, this needs to be addressed. Number 2, what is the actual price tag to the taxpayer with regard to Common Core and its subsequent assessments? We have never been able to get an answer to this question from anyone at the New Hampshire DOE, despite asking the question again and again. Fiscally speaking, this is irresponsible at best. How much will Common Core cost the local taxpayer in their district? Number 3, in January 2013, the Commissioner of Education told legislators that Common Core is not voluntary. Later, Commissioner Barry tells school board members in Bedford that the state never adopted CC, but only, quote, endorsed the standards. So which is it? Is Common Core voluntary to each community, or is it a state mandate? Despite Commissioner Barry telling a school board member in Alton that people were, quote, spreading misinformation, and that dissent was, quote, much ado about nothing, we still do not have clear and concise answers to these very important questions. Can communities opt out of Common Core and subsequent Smarter Balance assessments? Number 4, is data mining a facet of Common Core and the Smarter Balance assessments? Data mining is a huge concern amongst our citizenry. Our DOE will not honestly answer that question. I have sat at DOE meetings all over our state and have heard officials say there is, quote, no concern for New Hampshire citizens, or, quote, there are New Hampshire laws on the books to stop this. Clearly, at best, this is a misstatement. In December 2011, our federal FERPA laws were changed by the U.S. Department of Education to allow, quote, authorized representatives to personally receive access to student personal data. This data can be shared with trade unions, non-governmental agencies, and companies who develop educational products and services. And that includes information flowing from New Hampshire. So here we are. No clear answers from those at the New Hampshire DOE, just some propaganda and rhetoric which is trying to stifle dissent and discussion. We need to stop further implementation of Common Core and the accompanying assessments and let our communities truly participate in this discussion. This is just common sense. Education in New Hampshire is a local control issue. The DOE works for the people. The DOE is funded by the people. And the people deserve respectful and accountable answers by those at the New Hampshire DOE. We should never settle for anything less. We have information here for those who would like to receive further facts on Common Core New Hampshire and about today's upcoming hearings. We thank you for your presence here today. And I would like to now introduce to you Representative Lynette Peterson, who is the sponsor of HB 1508, terminating state involvement in the Common Core educational standards.
Thank you. In 2010, the New Hampshire Board of Education adopted Common Core state standards. They did not endorse them, as the Commissioner now claims. The Commissioner knows better, as she was in attendance when Common Core was adopted. The two 60-page final documents came out in June of 2010, and the Board of Education immediately held a public hearing on the Common Core English Language Arts state standards later that same week. The public did not weigh in on these standards because the public was not informed and had no time to become informed. The next board scheduled a special meeting in July to complete the adoption process to meet the federal deadline for its race to the top grant application. Again, the public was not informed, and it did not participate in this public hearing on the CC standards. The chairman of the Board of Education, John Lyons, expressed serious concerns about the centralization that would occur under CCSS, which he said was being shoved down our throats and represented a serious loss of control. He worried about governance going forward, including what opt-out provisions were available. Who will be making amendments to these standards going forward that would also be forced upon New Hampshire schools? States were given an exceedingly narrow time frame to adopt these standards, undermining the process of public debate and consideration. The board should have objected to this process, which undermined the ability of the public to participate. Instead, our state board engaged in a very superficial discussion on standards without public debate and rushed to adopt them. It was the end of the school year. Teachers were wrapping up their school year. Families were planning their vacations. No one testified at the hearing. No members of the public even attended. Using a roundtable format, 4 or 5 teachers gave comments to the board. Teachers admitted that they had not completed their comparison between CCSS and the existing New Hampshire standards. Paul Leather explained that the state needed to adopt 100% of the standards in order to be allowed to add up to 15% more content to these standards. Common Core standards themselves may not be modified in any way. It is an all or nothing proposition. John Lyons continued to voice his concerns about the process of adopting CCSS. These standards, he said, will create a blockage to change and innovation once we buy into this process. CCSS takes away power from the state of New Hampshire and our ability to innovate, even though New Hampshire is on the forefront of innovation. We won't even have control over our textbooks going forward. Chairman Lyons saw New Hampshire being lost in the shuffle of a large consortium of states when New Hampshire would become irrelevant and lose control. Common Core was adopted in an under-the-radar manner. Its implementation occurred without the knowledge or consent of the legislature, our school boards, or the public. Parents only now are beginning to wake up and realize what an overreach this decision to adopt CCS actually was. There has been little transparency to this process and the subsequent actions of the board. The department abridges the minutes of the board meetings. Only the video recordings are accurate. While recordings are made at each meeting, none of these have been posted on the department website for nearly 2 years now. This is unacceptable given the erroneous number of changes that are occurring in the Department and Board of Education. How can parents and taxpayers begin to understand the motivations behind these changes if there is no public record of any public debate or board discussion? These records must be readily available for public review and inspection. These changes affect our schools and our children, yet parents and taxpayers are unable to find the records. This lack of transparency undermines our ability to participate in our own local and state governments. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Doris Hohensee, the chairman of the New Hampshire Families for Education. In June of 2010, the Commissioner of Education anticipated the adoption of Common Core state standards by the board the following month, promised the U.S. Department of Education in a race to the top grant application that the Board of Education would adopt Common Core. Keep in mind that these standards were not even written at the point of this commitment. The board adopted Common Core within 30 days of receiving the final draft of the standards, which allowed for no public comment. Members of the public did not attend either of these two public hearings that were quickly scheduled for its adoption. In 2012, the Commissioner promised the U.S. Department of Education in their flexibility waiver application that not only would every district adopt Common Core for math and English art and language arts, but also that the board would adopt the science and social studies state standards, all of this by 2014. That promise exceeds the Commissioner's authority. It violates state law, RSA 193E, which guarantees local authority over curriculum. Common Core must be voluntary, not mandatory. In this grant application, however, the Commissioner promised rollout by district takes place in 3 stages, with an early adopter group of districts selected to start up in 2013 and 14, a second cohort to launch in 14 and 15, and the final cohort in 15 and 16. The early adopters and middle cohorts districts will be districts who volunteer to participate, with the remaining districts falling into the third and final cohort. This document is on the U.S. Department of Education website. It is not the abridged copy that can be found on the New Hampshire Department of Education website. This explains why the Division of Instruction Director, Heather Gage, could not locate this information and disputed its veracity. From the same application, there was a description of New Hampshire's implementation team, which explains how Common Core was implemented without adequate transparency for this process. There are 5 regional liaisons that are the newest addition. This is, I'm quoting. There are 5 regional liaisons that are the newest addition to the support and outreach plan for implementing Common Core state standards. The network strategy for the New Hampshire Department of Education, unquote. Next section. Quote, as part of their ongoing support role, the regional liaisons participate in monthly superintendent, principal, and curriculum instruction and assessment meetings that take place in their respective regions, unquote. Third section. They also form a conduit for feedback to the New Hampshire Department of Education, thereby supporting a continuous demand-driven approach to implementing Common Core state standards. The liaisons will participate in bi-monthly meetings with the Department of Education, New Hampshire Department of Education, included as members of the Commissioner's extended cabinet, ensuring a better two-way flow of information between the field, which are the districts, and the Department of Education. These regional centers were established under the department using federal funds, ensuring the implementation of Common Core throughout our state. This is how Common Core was implemented in nearly every school district in this state before parents or their school boards were notified. Regional liaisons have been meeting monthly with our school superintendents, principals, and curriculum specialists to implement Common Core without transparency, no meeting minutes, without knowledge or consent of the elected representatives of your school board or legislature. The department failed to acknowledge their mistake in hiring a director of the Division of Instruction, which violates state law that specifically establishes a Division of Educational Improvement. The department changed its website but failed to acknowledge this mistake. The department opposes public inquiry. What does it have to hide? It's time for the public to demand a thorough review. Why, for example, does the Director of Instruction or Educational Improvement oversee an Office of Health? This too exceeds the division's authority under state law. The department failed to explain the 2-year regional liaison program tasked in the grant application to implement Common Core. Who authorized these regional liaisons as members of the Commissioner's extended cabinet? The legislature had no role in this cabinet. Rather than rebuffing the public's requests regarding this overreach, the department should welcome scrutiny. It's irrelevant that the department views participation of these regional liaisons as voluntary, given how the chairman of the board felt in 2010 that the voluntary process of adopting Common Core felt more like the standards were being forced down our throats, unquote. The Director of Instruction suggests this process provides transparent communication to the field, yet the public and the local school boards received none of these transparent communications. There was no records of these meetings between the regional liaisons and the districts, who apparently were communicating voluntarily with the commissioner behind our backs.